the most simple things are actually the most effective in times like this.
Things are always changing.
Yeah.
You want to look for ideas that last for the long term. We like to say, think like Disney, big blockbuster bets on franchises that people come to know and respect. You're talking about brand, someone outside. You might as well be talking about the healing power of crystal.
Yeah. Welcome to the first episode in the Now Next Future series with Adverity and LinkedIn. I am thrilled to be joined by Ty Heath today, where we're going to be talking about some of the challenges that people working in the marketing and advertising industry are facing now, next, and in the future. So Ty, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure. Would you mind introducing yourself?
First, thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Ty Heath, I'm Director of Market Engagement at our LinkedIn B2B Institute think tank, where we study the future of B2B marketing and decision-making. We work with leading effectiveness thinkers and practitioners to investigate how marketing can create more value. So we've worked with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, thinkers like Les Binet and Peter Field, System One, a number of wonderful practitioners to make progress in B2B marketing.
You know all the answers. You've got all the information that I want around what everyone else is doing, how they're doing it.
We're always on the journey.
Yeah, you're on the journey.
Okay, on the journey.
Okay, you're on the journey. Obviously, we're talking about unpredictability or weather marketing. I started in my role at Adverity towards the end of 2019. And ever since then, there hasn't really been what I would call a control year. Is it just me? Is anyone else feeling the way that I'm feeling? What are you seeing at the B2B
Institute? We can have a bit of a therapy
session group therapy. Okay, cool, fine.
We have these events at LinkedIn called Executive Roundtables, and we bring together marketing leaders to have conversations around various topics, including this one. And, the sentiment is certainly there.
Okay.
We're all trying to navigate a complex environment, between the pandemic, economic environment, various world and social conditions. It's been nonstop, and it still continues today. So it's absolutely normal.
What are you seeing at the B2B Institute in terms of how advertisers are changing their strategy and changing their behaviors?
Things are always changing. AI is the latest hot thing. Now you can't go 5 minutes without something coming into the picture about AI. So of course, how marketers can use AI is the question right now. But at the B2B Institute, we actually have a contrarian take on what people should be thinking about as we think about how to navigate through a constantly changing world. So the question marketers want to know is what's different, what's everyone else doing?
I mean, that's literally what I asked you right at the beginning.
That's what marketers want to know. But we think a better question to ask is, what is no one else doing? So we have this mental model called the contrarian matrix. And so to quickly explain it, you can be right or wrong. You can be consensus with the crowd or contrarian against the crowd. When you are consensus and right, there's no value there because everyone's playing.
You're all playing the same game.
Everyone's playing the same game. So value gets competed away. So simply what you want to do is what no one else is doing and be right about it. Not only that, you want to look for ideas that last for the long term. And so for the past 5 years, we've been identifying trends, and we've identified over 30 trends. And 3 of them we found are the ones that if you practice them, if you invest in them for the long term, a lot of people aren't playing there. So there's a lot of value that can be gotten from that.
What are you seeing people do right now that is working?
There are really 3 things that we say to invest in. So one, there's this conversation about short-term and long-term and what do we do? And I think that's very important right now. We call it war on brand. And especially during an economic downturn, we have this trend called the 95-5 rule, which says that 95% of category buyers are out market at any given time, which means they're not thinking about your brand at the moment. They don't have a buying intention.
I would want to completely agree with you there. And I would say that from my perspective as a CMO in-house, over the last year, I have definitely seen the demand that's in market become more expensive to capture and slower to close.
Right. During a time like this, that ratio shifts even further. 95.5 can become 99.1.
Okay.
So now you have 1% of category buyers in market.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that we need to shift our attention as marketers and start thinking long term because there's less latent demand to capture.
Yeah.
There's a really great quote from marketing effectiveness researcher Peter Field.
Oh, yeah.
He said that marketing in a recession is not about profiting on the recession, it's about capitalizing on the recovery. Yeah. So if we invest in brand, now we're building memory structures for people, so later on when we move out of this time, that we're the brands we think of. So we believe that people are actually under invested in brand generally, and in particular during an economic downturn, there could be more focus on brand because there's just not the latent demand to capture at that.
So I completely agree with the logic. As a marketer myself, completely understand and agree with the strategy. But let's just put this in a real world context for a minute. So I'm looking at the industry, I'm looking at my pipeline, and I'm thinking, okay, my spend is not demonstrating as much of a short-term revenue impact as it was 18 months ago. My CFO will question, okay, well, where can we make adjustments? Where do we make adjustments to your customer acquisition cost and the associated revenue that it's bringing in? The question is always going to be, Harriet, how can you adjust your spend and your strategy in a way that doesn't impact any chance of capturing near-term, short-term revenue? The obvious answer is always going to be, well, I probably have to pull back a little bit on the longer-term awareness-raising brand activity. How would you counter at that point?
One of the things that we've developed, because we want to make sure marketers are connected to how do you have those types of conversations, is this idea of all-weather marketing.
Yeah.
So, one of the most renowned finance investors of all time, Ray Dalio, had this portfolio called all-weather marketing, and he designed it to be up even when S&P 500 was down.
Yeah.
And so there are ways for us to think about marketing strategy from a strategy, creative distribution, and measurement standpoint.
Yeah.
To have a conversation with finance about what's really real.
Yeah.
I think what we're facing as marketers is a disconnect on the value that marketing creates, and specifically the real value of brand to help navigate through long-term challenges. So going back to the 95.5 rule I talked about, the traditional mental model that marketers use is the funnel.
Yeah.
So we also have a different take on that. We have a contrarian take on the funnel.
Talk to me about the different funnel.
Yes. So we actually like to take the funnel, imagine flipping it on its side, and now you're thinking about a timeline on the x-axis, right? Okay. And so you have in-market and out-market.
Yeah.
And in-market corresponds with current buyers.
Yeah.
And out-market corresponds with future buyers.
The way that I think about it within my team at Adverity is we think about creating demand for the future and capturing demand in the present.
Right.
So there's a creation element and then there's a capture. And I think what you're saying is exactly the same, just
that's right,
using a slightly different terminology.
Yeah, so I'm asking you to imagine this. And this is the type of conversation we want to start having with finance.
Yeah.
Because it's a more customer-centric way, as you said, to think about how you're capturing and also generating for the future.
Yeah.
But it's also aligned with a financial picture of current and future cash flow. So now you're having a conversation about what the market really looks like, and you can start pointing to how 95.5 becomes 99.1 and the importance of now it's time for us to start building for how we're going to move through the recession.
Yeah.
And I think there's also a conversation about what are the different value points that marketers create. So brand gives you pricing power. People want to spend more for brands that they are connected to and remember.
Absolutely.
It gives you the ability to attract better talent.
Yeah.
We see it on LinkedIn profiles.
Okay.
When people leave companies they love, they still have on their profile X. I used to work at this company.
Absolutely, yeah.
It gives you category optionality. So what I mean by that is that all categories shrink over time, and it gives you the ability to pivot into a new space because your brand lives on. And I can go on and on about the different benefits that marketers bring, the value that marketers bring. You know, and then I think the final piece is that we need to learn to speak in more financial terms.
That was going to be my next question was, again, completely agree with everything you're saying. How do you then speak to a non-marketer, a non-marketing brain in a different team in the business with a very different way of looking at numbers?
You know, thinking about the 95-5 rule and starting to configure the way you describe what you're up to in financial terms.
Yeah.
But I'll come back to just the way we speak.
Yeah.
Because there's a really funny quote from Rory Sutherland. He's a renowned marketer from Ogilvy, behavioral scientist. He said, if you're talking about brand, someone outside of marketing, you might as well be talking about the healing power of crystal.
Yeah.
Now, I have crystals at my house. I love crystals. But if we're talking to finance or literally any other stakeholder, it sounds fluffy. And so if we're using, you know, marketing jargon, you know, all over, you don't sound smart, you sound irrelevant to folks.
Absolutely.
So we need to think about how to have that language land.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is go to market with the other stakeholders within the business. Yeah. So have finance pull up alongside you as you think about new strategies, you think about pricing, as you think about new products. Have them have skin in the game.
Yeah.
So a lot of opportunity for us to all better understand each other, completely. Not just a one-way street. So let me make that clear as well.
I completely agree. And I think this really nicely touches on another topic that we were talking about this morning. We were talking about the fact that if you're talking to a CFO or you're talking to the finance unit, you need to have integrity in the data that you've got access to. You need to be able to tell the right story with the numbers that you have in front of you. And there was a piece of research that we actually did at Verity, I think it was last year, and it was 300 CMOs in small and medium-sized businesses in North America and Europe. And there was one stat that I always remember that came out of it, which is that 30% of the CMOs we surveyed their teams are only checking their marketing data up to once a quarter, which for me, as someone who works in an in-house marketing team who has very revenue-focused metrics, that for me is quite incredible to think that in order to have integrity with your finance team and to have these types of conversations, yes, you need to be able to talk about the long-term strategy and the value of brand, which is sometimes slightly more difficult to quantify in a short-term time frame. But if you can't explain the short-term demand capture element, if you're not paying attention to what your data is saying, I feel like you're already on the back foot in those conversations. I don't know if that's something that you would agree with.
I agree. But I think let me add to that by saying I think that not only do we need to know the short-term pipeline and be able to pivot, adjust our strategy based on that, we also need to also be balanced in the approach and have people give brand and respect the fact that brand effects compound over time and that there's also maybe up to 6 months for us to start seeing the returns on investment for a brand. So to monitor the short-term metrics, absolutely, and adjust, and also watch and invest in the long term. You know, and to that end, I think there are also some other things that we can be doing, you know, to position ourselves as frugal, thoughtful leaders during this time as we think about creative. You know, we don't need to continuously create new advertising creative when times are tough because there's an opportunity for us to actually invest in creative that's already showing up, that people remember, that people are connected to.
That is a nice example, by the way. I like that because what I'm always really keen on is to try to extract some really tangible examples of what people can actually do. Reusing your creative is a great one. I wanted to offer up, for example, we spend a lot of time working with our new business teams. We're now spending just as much time working with our existing account teams because we can see much more value in helping to build customer relationships, expand existing accounts. When you look at what the net new pipeline is costing us, it becomes a much more efficient way of working. So again, for me, it's around, it seems very simple, but I think it goes back to what you said earlier, which is actually sometimes the most simple things are actually the most effective in times like this. What else? So you mentioned reusing creative. What about distribution? I'm sure that you've got some points on distribution.
So just to stick on creative for a while, because I would say creative wears in rather than wearing out. So we like to say, think like Disney, big blockbuster bets on franchises that people come to know and respect. Like the big movies that people see all the time, like the Harry Potters, all the sequels. Like people get connected to those things as well, and having distinctive assets and making sure that you're branding everything.
And is that what you're saying? Because again, some people might think, oh my God, Disney, like that's a multi-billion-dollar organization. How can I translate what they're doing into something that I can do? You mentioned the word distinctive, like making your assets distinctive. Is that sort of principle that you would extract from that?
Right. And there's a lot of principles for creative that work big for big or small companies. Things like using the colors, the logo, characters, music, basically things that trigger memory for people. There's a lot of underutilized things that people could be doing, and you want to have that show up every single time. The last thing I would say about that is to just make sure that your team is, as you're thinking about where you're going to go next, thinking about how do you repurpose some of the ideas and constructs. That's going to save your team time and money. And then when you go have a conversation with finance, you show up as like, you were able to save money here in creative that we can now pivot to distribution.
That makes a lot of sense, because there's, I can imagine that there's a lot of marketers sat there right now that have been given the directive of to do more, but with less. Seems to be a saying that I see around a lot at the moment. And I think both of those are really nice examples of things that people can actually do, which puts that in practice.
The thing that we say, and this is the third part of the three trends that we say.
First
so let's war on brand.
War on brand,
the
right?
First one, we are over-indexed in demand generation. Could do more on the brand side. Number 2 is blockbuster. Bet big on blockbuster creative. And then number 3 is what we call the death of hyper-targeting.
Okay.
So
let's talk. Can we talk about that for a bit?
Let's talk about that for a bit. Because what we tend to do as marketers, because we can, is target, Joe in Montana who loves cats and comic books, and all, we layer on all of these different things,
making it as specific as possible.
Making it very specific. But what we fail to recognize when we do that is that we're making a lot of assumptions.
Absolutely.
When you layer on targeting facet after targeting facet, you're forgetting that buying groups change over time. And there's a lot of things that we don't know when we are doing all of that. So what we advocate for instead is category reach. So relevant reach within a category. Because then you're targeting across the whole buying committee. You're targeting the different decision makers, maybe even people who aren't quite at decision maker capacity yet, but they will be a year from now. And so you're constantly building.
That makes sense. And I think that touches on something that I feel quite strongly about. I think in times where there is a certain level of unpredictability, one of the things that we really focus on and really double down on is our positioning and our messaging. Businesses as well as people are paying much more attention to what they spend their money on. And I would say that the more that you can do to really understand the value that you bring to your customers that makes your product essential. It has to be essential. It cannot be a nice to have. It has to be something that's completely necessary.
And so, going back to what we said before, I think it's important, given what you just said about really understanding and going back to basics of what the customer needs. Marketing and finance are really two sides of the same coin. Finance with the power to invest, save, and spend, but marketing with the category view and the capacity to really understand what the customer needs and wants, that view of the customer. And so I would say also during times like these, we need to defend our research budget. We need to make sure that we're continuing to understand, keep our ears to the ground, and understand what our customers are needing. And in particular, in a time like this where we also need to be responsive to what's going on in the world.
So obviously over the last 4 years, we've had the COVID pandemic, we've had the war in Ukraine, we now have what feels like continually rising inflation. It really does build a very unpredictable economic environment within which marketers have to operate in.
We have to, during times like these, take care of our teams, take care of each other. I think speaking truth, to the extent that you can share is important for people to kind of absorb and understand where things are. But then also thinking about some of the principles we talked about today from an all-weather marketing standpoint to help people navigate through, from a strategy standpoint, remembering that, we're going to be around here for the long term. How do we remain steady and not reactive during a time like this? From a creative standpoint, thinking about how do we repurpose and build on what we already have.
I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about skill sets as well. Our customer base at Adverity is all CMOs, people that are, given a lot of responsibility and expected to deliver. There is definitely an element of resilience that I think is becoming more and more important. I often feel resilience is quite hard to teach. It's something that you have to live through. You have to live through and work through the ups and the downs.
Yeah, I think the one thing we can all count on is change. And that's the one constant thing. And so to the extent that we can absorb and learn lessons from life and sort of think about the context in which we view things, I think it starts there. I love this idea of in every challenge, there's an opportunity. And that really great things can come from hard times.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's actually a time where if we are steady, we can start to think about solutions and solutions that can transform into big opportunities later on. So I think there's a mindset framing that we can learn, a level of discipline to remain steady as things go on.
When there is a certain level of unpredictability, it is very easy and also explainable, but it's very easy to explain everything away with the reason of it being external factors, external forces, external factors beyond our control. And absolutely, completely agree that that is always going to play a role. But I do still fundamentally think that there are things that we can do as marketers to impact change.
One other thing I would add, because we love mental models at the B2B Institute, is this idea of probabilistic versus deterministic thinking.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So we can't predict. We can't predict everything. I think between the pandemic, all the things you said,
all of the things,
you just don't know what's going to come. Rather than acting as if and planning as if you know the answer, everything that's coming, which it would be a deterministic model way of thinking about the world, thinking more probabilistically is a way to address that. Now you're thinking about ranges. You're thinking about these variety of different things could happen, and now you're planning for possible different outcomes. So now you have a broader range of thinking about what could happen, and you're more prepared for it. And also you're just more anchored in that we can't control things. And so let's prepare for a world in which we don't know the answer all the time.
I like that. That goes back to a motto that I often use, which is ABP, which is always be prepared.
I love it.
Always
ABP.
try and think 2-3 steps ahead, all the different possible eventualities before you take any kind of action. So let's touch on AI, because it wouldn't be a marketing interview if we didn't. And I'm very interested to know what your perspective is.
It's already exists around us, and it has existed for some time, but I think it's becoming very real in terms of people thinking about the future of work, what it means for their jobs.
Absolutely.
How it can be an assistant to augment. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in it. And the first step is to really understand the implications of it. But if your customers are leveraging it, if our communities are leveraging it, if our shareholders are leveraging it, we have a responsibility. At LinkedIn, we have a skills report that we can do. We have this thing called the economic graph, which is a digital map of the global economy, right? And so we can see, how things are flowing, what skills are on the rise, what skills are on the decline, because of what's happening within the platform. And machine learning and AI skills are absolutely on the rise broadly. So it's not something, and I know that you're not going to say this, it's not something to put your head in the sand about, it's something to be aware of, to think about how your team can start to absorb and understand the applications.
Yeah.
And you not realize that you don't have to go from 0 to 100, but I think it is time for us to start thinking about how we incorporate these things, because we're going to be challenged. Your competition is going to be integrating AI into their solutions.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I'm curious, what's your point of view?
I completely agree with you. I think it's here to stay. I don't think it's a fad. It's definitely here to stay. And I think there's absolutely some efficiency gains that you can make from its practical application. I use it. I use it to proofread copy. I use it to optimize copy. I use it to write a policy document and maybe do 50% of the work for me. So I completely understand and can see its value. The other side of the coin I just wanted to sort of just share an observation on is I was at an event probably a couple of months ago now, and it was full of CMOs, heads of marketing, heads of analytics, heads of data analytics, North America, European, Fortune 500, FTSE 100 brands. Yes, a huge number of the sessions were about AI, but in the breakout sessions and the coffee conversations and over lunches, what everyone was really talking about was, this is great, and absolutely we have to have an answer to this question. But what enterprise brands are still struggling with, and I think every marketer struggles to a certain extent, is the fact that the real problems they're still trying to solve in order to be able to really get the benefits of applying machine learning and artificial intelligence on top of their data is still quality data. So the actual quality of the data that they have, the level of data governance they have over that data. Can they compare apples with apples? Do they have access to their data in a timely fashion? You can buy all of the fancy singing, all dancing AI technologies in the world, but if you don't have a single source of truth where your data is of high quality, it is transformed, it is enriched, it is in a state by which you can actually benefit from that technology, then it could potentially become a wild distraction in a time where actually focusing on basics, taking things really back to basics is the way to make small incremental gains every day. That's just my view.
You're spot on, because we have to be responsible with our use of AI. Bad data, if it's trained on poor data, you're going to have poor results. Absolutely. If it's biased, you're going to have biased results.
Absolutely.
And so thinking about how you can have direct data versus indirect data, shorten the data supply chain so you're more clear on what's being trained on is so key.
Yeah. So that's I don't think it's too controversial opinion, but I do think sometimes people look at it as if it's a magic wand that you can just apply this over your data and hey presto, there you are. But in reality, people still struggle with the basics.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that. We have to be responsible with the use of it.
So I think that probably brings us towards the end of our conversation, Ty. It's been such a pleasure. And I guess I wanted to just understand from you if you had maybe one or two takeaways to give the audience. What would they be? Because we've talked about a lot today, and there's definitely some things that have stood out for me. One being it's no longer 95.5, it's more like 99.1.
Take care of each other. Take care of your customers during this time. Think long term. As you said, 95.5 becomes 99.1. You don't have to change your creative. Focus on building with what you have. And then rethink how you're measuring, communicate, and also communicating that to finance and other departments. It'll be more aligned.
Ty, I think that's the end of the session today. Thank you so much for joining me. I would love to be able to link to some of the research that you've mentioned.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So we will have the research on our website, on our page on unpredictability.com. We will also have some information about episodes 2 and 3 for people to check out. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me. Feel free to follow the B2B Institute on LinkedIn. We have great content coming out there. And also I'm open to connecting people, following their journey on LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely. Great to hear. Thank you very much.